All right, I think we're ready to begin then. We're talking about 2 Samuel, and we've got a lot of chapters to cover. I want to talk about, in 2 Samuel, David and his children. Anybody ever have any problems with children? How many of you have never had children? That's a better question, right, to say that. And I really am amazed at how many people in the Bible really had problems with their children. And so if you've, your children have not been everything you want them to be, I think there'll be some realization of the fact that you're not alone all the way through the Bible. And so we get to David and his children. I want to begin by thanking David Sproul for teaching about David and Bathsheba. It's a great story about David, and it's part of David's life and some of the things that happened later in David's life. But I want us to turn our attention away from David and Bathsheba and talk about something that I hope will help us all to be encouraged. And I don't mean to just sanction having ungodly children, but the reality is that way. Anybody have any children? You remember the first son? You remember what his name was? The first son that was born. Well, he's the Son of God. You're playing a trick on me, because in Luke's account of the genealogy, he gets to Adam and he was the Son of God. Who were Adam and Eve's first son? How did he turn out? Not so good. Isn't that amazing? I mean, the very first son. Well, let's see. How did Methuselah's son turns out? How did Lamech? Well, Lamech's son turned out to be pretty good. But how many of those genealogies from Adam until Noah, how righteous were they? Isn't that amazing? By the time you get to the time of Noah, every thought and imagination of man's heart on earth was evil. Problem children. And you talk about the children of Israel, how long did it take them to get wayward and turned away from God? Just amazing. They get into the promised land, and when that older generation that had been in the wilderness, when that generation died, they left God. And for 400 years, it's the story of wayward children. That doesn't mean they were not godly children. And then you get over here to what about Eli? What about his sons? What about Samuel and his sons? And so now we get here to talking about David and his children. Do you know that David was a polygamist? Have you ever wondered how Solomon might have justified having the number of wives how many wives did he have? Everybody remember how many wives Solomon had? 1,000. Huh? Well, if you count the concubines as wife, Chet said he had 1,000. 700 wives. Isn't that amazing? You want to name them? When you can't even remember your own wife's name sometime, do you want to try to remember the name of 700 wives? That is an amazing, and how much time did he spend with them? How many days in a year? I mean, you stop and think about it. And so he had all of these wives, and so David had 8 wives that we specifically know of, and he had 19 children whose names we know. So here's Solomon. He comes along. Solomon has all of those wives. And where'd that come from? That's the world he grew up in. Isn't that amazing? And I'm not trying to justify Solomon's having multiple wives and everything, but here is David, and sometimes we're not aware of the fact that David had all of these wives. And how did he get one of them? You remember how he got Bathsheba? A little conniving went on there, was there not? I think there was murder that was involved and that sort of thing. And so I've put on the screen the names of the wives, just so that you can look at them and just think about how many of these names do you recognize. Here are the wives that he had. And you recognize any of them? Do you get, could you even pronounce some of the names of those, you know? I mean, that we know Bathsheba, and we might know Abigail. I had a teacher at Athens Bible School in the 8th grade, and he named his daughter Abigail. He didn't call her Gail, he called her Abigail. You know what Abigail means? At least this is what he said it meant when I was in the 8th grade. My daddy is happy. And I just find that amazing, you know. And so somebody named their child Abigail. And of that, you're probably not going to recognize many more of the names. One of them is Saul's daughter. The first one that's up there is Saul's daughter. We don't know anything about that, except we do know that's mentioned 2 or 3 times in the book of 2 Samuel. We don't have time to talk about all of these. And then he had children, and we may not be aware of the children. We've got 2 slides here. Might as well go ahead and put the other one up also, and that is, they're the children that he had when he was in Hebron, and then the children that he had when he was in Jerusalem. David reigned for 40 years. But the first 7 years, he was not in Jerusalem. In fact, the Jews had not even conquered Jerusalem. And it is David who goes in there, and we've talked about this in a previous study. David who goes in there and conquers Jerusalem and takes it away from the Jebusites. They call that city Jebusalem, from Jebusites, Salem. Salem is a name. Salem's been way over back in the book of Genesis. You remember Melchizedek? He was king of Salem. And so it's over in that area, but when the Jews came to the Promised Land, it was a real fortified city, and so they did, not that they were unable, they just chose not to conquer the city. And so David has these sons when he's in Hebron, and then he has all of these other sons whenever he gets into the city of Jerusalem. Now look at that last statement up there. And David took more concubines and wives from Jerusalem after he'd come from Hebron. Also more sons and daughters were born to him. The word more is interested in that verse. After he came to Jerusalem, he took more wives and more concubines. We have a number associated with the number of concubines in one story, and that may not be the total number, but there are 10 concubines that are mentioned in relationship to David, and we'll talk that a little bit later. But he said he had more daughters. And so David has more daughters, plural. Does that mean he had daughters before? Perhaps. We only know, as far as I know, the names of one of those daughters. Now let's look at a chart that has all of this on it, and I don't know if you can follow this is not my design of the chart, but it sort of fits the way I think. Here's David up there, and there's his prodigy, and this is not his, Hebron is not a child of his. It's a geographical location. And so over there are the wives that he had that had children. He had one other wife, and her name is not listed on this, but because she didn't have any children. And so the verses that list these leave her out. And that's what we're talking about a family tree, and so there are no children. But if you'll look, you'll see the names of some of those children, and that's who we're going to focus on, not all of these children that are here. And then you get over to the second group over there, and there's the word Jerusalem, and we've got Bathsheba over there. And so you've got Bathsheba. Have you ever thought about Solomon was not the only son she had? I just find it rather interesting that David and Bathsheba had sons. You recognize any of the names of one of those sons over there under Bathsheba's name? I find that interesting. Sometimes we name children out of people that we have known, and I don't know if it's to pay tribute to them. Sometimes we take a father's name, and the Jews did that a lot, they'd put the son of and as a part of the name. But here's Nathan. That's not Nathan the prophet. Nathan the prophet is one guy, but when when David and Bathsheba have other children, they name one of the sons Nathan. You go back to the other side and you see the second son that's over there in Hebron. You see the name of that son. My name is David, and I have a son named Daniel. Okay, so I probably will remember that. I'm not even. I think I would have known that before, but it's only when you lay out the table in this respect. Let me just digress for just a minute. We've talked about Jesus being the son of David. Now you look at the genealogy, and in Luke you've got a different listing of the ancestry of Jesus, and evidently that is through Mary. And they differ a lot. Well, where does that come from? Because when you read Luke's account, Luke traces the genealogy of Mary through Nathan. That's interesting. And so whenever you look and try to compare the genealogy, the begats over there in Matthew, it's the legal genealogy. It is through the father and everything. And so we go from Abraham all the way down to Joseph, the father of Jesus. And so we've got the lineage of Jesus legally, and then you've got the true bloodline, because Joseph was not literally the father of Jesus. Jesus was born of a virgin, but he was the father in the sense that he was the legal father. And so now you've got that genealogy. And sometimes you may have wondered, well, if you'll check it out, this is where the split comes. The split comes when you get over there to Nathan and Solomon, because Jesus came through Solomon and Joseph, his father. Jesus came through Nathan, through Mary, the mother, the son of David, or through Mary, through Nathan, the son of David. And so you've got all of that. Look at that next slide, and I've got some things highlighted there. I've got some names that we're going to look at. We don't know anything about any of these children. You look at all of that, and hard to even pronounce their name. It's rather interesting to see them and to see all of these names that are there. Aren't you glad that you didn't name any children some of these? I mean, I think about, Mephibosheth being in kindergarten, trying to write his name. I mean, here's Dan, he writes his name in a real Herbie, but how'd you like to be named Mephibosheth and have to learn how to spell that and how to put which letters in the right place and everything? And so it's a cultural thing. And I think it is interesting how people name their children. I think it's interesting in the black culture in America. Isn't that amazing? It has its own way of dealing with that kind of thing. And it's not wrong, it's just different. When I was in Samoa, just there visiting in the work that was in Samoa, they had the other language, had the Samoan language. But they wanted to have an English name for their children. And so there was one little girl, and her mother worked at the hospital. And a good way to talk to a little child is, "What is your name?" And I said, "What is your name?" Keep in mind, this is not the language, English is not the mother tongue there, but she liked the sound of this word, so this little girl, her name was Oxygen. I've never met anybody named Oxygen, have you? I mean, that just, but I find that real interesting. And there was another little girl, I said, "And what is your name?" And she said, "Not right." And all I can think of, she's not right. You know, I mean, I don't know. I just sort of put that together. But it's a cultural thing, you know. How many descendants of David, David Daniel Jenkins and Judy Ann Jenkins, how many of those have the name of Dan or Judy? I think it's amazing to look at it. It's a cultural thing, you know. And so, I've got a son and a grandson that bear the name of my father. Where'd that come from? It came because I wanted that influence to try to be in the influence of those children. And so these sons, we know almost very little about, but we do know some things here, and there is Amnon. Amnon was his firstborn child. And then we get over to where there are two names, and there you have the name of Absalom and his sister Tamar. Now I've got Adonijah down here because he becomes critical whenever Solomon is being made king. Adonijah tries to become king. There's an effort, there's a movement among the Jews where this other son of David, they tried to make him to be king. Isn't that sort of what we read about in relationship to David becoming king? And you remember trying to get, what was his name, Ishbosheth? Is that his name? That tried to be the descendant of Saul that sat on the throne. And so I've circled that one because that is a name that you will run across, and I just want you to be aware of it because it's only when you get over in 1 Kings that you run into this guy Adonijah. Now then, let's talk about his children. There are so many chapters and so many stories that are associated with David and his children. Amnon loved his sister Tamar. Go back to that previous slide just a minute so everybody can see what we're talking about. There's Amnon, and there is his, would you call that half-sister? I don't guess you call it step-sister, do you? I may not understand what a step-sister is, but I know it's half-sister. Now, when you've got that many wives and that many households, this is likely not some sexually perverted kind of thing. I don't want to overstate what's stated, but we need to understand the culture in relationship to this. But we've got this situation here, and we're trying to deal with this situation here. And so what happens? Amnon loved his, I've got stepsister there, Tamar. Look at that next slide there, because all of this is in 2 Samuel chapter 13. I want to pull that up here on my computer so I can be able to look at it and announce the verses to you as we look at it. See if I can get this to come up. Can you believe I got back from Ohio and I've left my Bible and my iPad in Ohio? And so it's on its way, but I didn't want to pay $30 to get it here overnight, so they just sent it regular mail. So the mail, I expected to be here by 2027, okay? I just want you to know that it's on its way. At least that's what the preacher has to say. And so let's look over here at this passage, and let's look at 2 Samuel. And what chapter did I say? Chapter 13. I'll be there in just a minute. And I use the word loved here because that's the word the Bible uses. And that's even the very fact that word is used may be an indication that, the feelings that we have toward incest, this may not be an incestuous thing. And let me illustrate. Mike and Jean Archer are a classic illustration of this. They were not an incestuous thing, but the classic illustration. they knew each other in the 5th grade down in Barbados, is that right? And then their lives went this way. Sort of high school sweethearts, at least he thought she was pretty. I'm not sure what he thought about her, but you understand? He thought she was pretty. I'm not sure what she thought about him, and I'm just making that up. And then later in life, they came together. And they knew each other, and throughout, their marriages, before their, in their previous marriages and everything, they would run across each other every now and then. And then now, in the latter part of their life, they've been married. How many years? Mike, I don't need to ask you this. Gene, how many years you've been married? 20? Isn't that amazing? And so now then, imagine a mother having 2 children, a son and a daughter, and at birth they're separated. It's not separated in the 5th grade, but separated at birth. And sometimes with adoption and foster homes, that kind of thing should happen. Later on in life, they could see each other again. We went from the 5th grade and between Mike and Gene, but just imagine in our imaginary situation, they're brothers and sisters. They never know they're brothers and sisters. And they meet and they fall in love. They don't know they're brothers and sisters. And so it is possible for an individual to love a sister that, and it not have anything to do with sexual perversion. Now, I know in our culture, that's a little bit hard for us to illustrate. That's why I took the illustration of talking about separated at birth. And they may never even know that they meet later in life, somewhere in college or something, and they meet someone who is truly their sister or truly their brother. And so they fall in love. That's not sexual perversion. Now then, take that back to biblical times. Whenever there oftentimes were where oftentimes there were men who married sisters, like Jacob marrying Rachel and Leah. That'd be a weird thing in our society to be, we're reared at the same time to be married to them, but that's a cultural thing, and it has nothing at all to do with perversion. And so when I read about this, he loved his sister Tamar. Look at this. After this, Absalom, the son of David, had a lovely sister whose name was Tamar, and Amnon, the son of David, loved her. Here's love sickness. Amnon was so distressed over his sister Tamar, he became sick. He wanted so much to have Tamar as a wife. He loved her that much that he became sick, for she was a virgin. And it was improper for Amnon to do anything to her. And so that shows in relationship to that culture. Here's a situation, even that culture would find this kind of thing to be really, really weird in relationship to it. But Amnon had a friend, his name was Jonadab. Now, his daddy was David's brother. What's the relationship between Amnon and Jonadab?
First cousin.
They're first cousins. And so he's got this cousin. Now, we read that Tamar was a lovely sister. Amnon had a friend. He was a very crafty man. This is the New King James. And he said to her, "Why are you, the king's son, becoming thinner every day?" He's lovesick. I mean, he's in love with this. He wants to have her, and he's not able to get her. So Jonadab said to him, "Lie down in your bed." This is his craftiness. "Pretend that you're sick, and when your father comes to see you, say to him, 'It would really be good if Tamar could come over here and cook some for me.'" And so Amnon lay down, pretended to be ill. King David came. Amnon said to the king, "Let Tamar my sister come, make cakes for me, that I may eat from her hand." David sent home to Tamar, said, "Go to your brother's house and prepare food for him." Sometimes you make some choices you really, really regret. Here's one. This is about to all turn upside down. Because whenever he gets over there, he's lying down, and she takes the food, begins baking it, verse 8, in front of him. She takes the pan, places it out before him, and refused to eat. And so Amnon said, "Everybody leave the room. Just leave me and Tamar in here." Then, now when she'd brought them to him, he took hold of her and said, "Lie with me, my sister." She answered, "No, my brother, do not force me, for no such thing should be done in Israel. Do not this disgraceful thing." Tamar's got some real values. And where could I take my shame? And as for you, you'd be like one of the fools in Israel. Therefore, speak to the king, for he will not withhold me from you. I find that interesting that even David might approve of this marriage. You got to make that cultural thing. Don't you make that an American thing and think, he was really vile and everything. You know, we live on this side of the fullness of the revelation of God. You know how many books David had of the Bible? That's what he had. When David becomes king, he had 7 books of the Bible. That's amazing. So don't make a wrong judgment about David in relation. But there was this, and said, you know, he might give. You could ask my father. However, he would not heed her voice, and being stronger than she, he forced her to lay with him. What happens immediately? Amnon hated her exceedingly, so that the hate with which he hated her was greater than the love that he had of her. So he turns against her. And so he says, "Get out of this house." He calls the servant and says, "Put this woman out of the house, away from me. Shut the door and lock it." She had on a robe of many colors. There's a trivia question. Who had a coat of many colors? There's 2 people that did. Tamar had a coat of many colors, for the king's virgins' daughters wore such apparel, and his servants put her out and bolted the door. She put ashes on her head, tore her robe of many colors that was on her, laid her hand on her head, and went out crying bitterly. And Absalom, her brother, said to her, "Has Amnon, your brother, been with you? Hold your peace, my sister. He's your brother. Do not take this thing to heart." So Tamar remained desolate in Absalom's house. When David heard of these things, and there are times in your life when things have come to you, statements and things that are happening, you'll learn about things your children have done. When David hears of this, he was very angry. Absalom spoke to his brother Amnon, neither good nor bad, for Absalom hated Amnon because he had forced his sister Tamar. What a happy Thanksgiving they're going to have. Isn't that amazing? You stop and think about that family has been torn asunder. And I know you've probably had adversity with your children. Who has not? But you've never faced anything like this. After 2 full years, Absalom tries to invite all of the king's sons to a feast, and he goes to David and says, "Please let them come." And he begins to beg David, and then he finally says to David, verse 26, Absalom says, "If not, you can't let all my brothers and sisters come. Let my brother Amnon go with us." And the king said to him, "Why should he go?" Absalom urged him, so he let Amnon and all the king's sons go with him. Absalom had commanded his servant, "When Amnon is drunk, when he's merry with wine, when I say to you, 'Strike Amnon, kill him,' do not be afraid. Have I not commanded you? Be courageous and very valiant. And so that very thing happened. Verse 33, therefore let not thy love take this thing to his heart, to think that all of the king's son, the report got back that all of the king's son. No, it's not Absalom at this point trying to get rid of any other heirs to the throne. He's settling a score. Have problems with your children? I doubt you've ever had a child to rape another child. Maybe you've had that, and if you have, how tragic sin is. But what about a child who kills his own brother? And so when this happened, Absalom flees. Look at the next verse. Absalom fled, and the young man who was keeping watch lifted his eyes and looked. Many people were coming from the road on the hillside behind him. And so he says to David, here are your sons coming back from the feast. Your sons are not dead. And so the Bible down in verse 38 says, Absalom fled and went to Geshur and was there for 3 years. How are you taking it, David? David longed for Absalom. Isn't that amazing? You never give up on your children. And he longs for Absalom, but he's done wrong. And an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, and you take a man's life unjustly, what's going to happen? What's the punishment? And this is part of where David is in relationship to this. For he had been comforted concerning Amnon because he was dead. We've got to go to chapter 15. So there is a way that Joab plays a trick on David. You remember how Nathan gave a parable type story about, the man had many sheep and the man that had few sheep. Joab does the same thing, except he gets a woman to go in and say, I had 2 sons, one of them killed the other, and so what do we do about this? And David said, you got to get that son back. You got to get that son back to his mother. And so then David figures out, he said, did Joab send you to me? But it is the truth. So now Absalom comes back to the throne. Look in chapter 15, verse 1. By the way, the text says that whenever he came back, David would not even had him come to eat with him. There's a problem in that son's life, and David would not even let that son come and eat with him. That's really interesting, and that's in the chapter that we just had to skip. What about Absalom? He's back in Jerusalem. He's been a fugitive. What's he doing? Well, he's playing all of his cards just right, playing every one of them just right. He would rise early and stand by the way to the gate where people are coming in and out of Jerusalem. So it was when everyone had a lawsuit that came before the king for a decision that Absalom would call him and say, what city are you from? And they would tell him such and such a city, such and such a tribe. And Absalom would say, look, you've got a good case here. Your case is good and right, and there's no justice with the king. What if I were king? And all of a sudden the seeds are being sown for the most tragic part of David's life. Look at what he has. Verse 1, Absalom provided himself with chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him. Isn't that amazing? And he's the king's son. I mean, he is running to be the king. And he is outmaneuvering David in everything that it does. And so verse 5, when anyone came near to bow to him, he would put out his hand and take him and kiss him. In this manner, Absalom acted toward all Israel who came to the king for judgment. He stole the hearts of the men of Israel. So now we got a king, but we got a wannabe king, and that's Absalom. And so when it says in verse 7, after 40 years, evidently, that's talking about after 40 years of David's reign. Well, the only way you can really begin to make this sense is because David only reigned for 40 years, and David is still king. So this after 40 years means he's in his 41st year of reigning. Didn't complete it. And so these things that we're talking about what Absalom is doing, things that are happening as David is an old man. David's near the end of his life, and he's looking back, and everything's gone wrong. After 40 years, Absalom said to the king, "Let me go to Hebron, pay the vow which I made to the Lord. Your servant took a vow," Absalom, your servant, King David, took a vow when I was in Gershom, "If the Lord indeed bring me back to Jerusalem, then I will serve the Lord." By the way, Absalom has now maneuvered David into such a position, that's in a chapter we don't have time to discuss, so that now he has access to the king. Set some field on fire, and we can't deal with that whole story, but it's an interesting story to read. And with Absalom, 200 men came from Jerusalem, and they went along innocently, did not know anything. And Absalom sent unto David's counselor, and the word got there, and the conspiracy, I'm reading the last part of verse 12, grew strong for all the people, for the people with Absalom continually increased in numbers. A messenger came to David and says, "David, you've lost the favor of the people. Insurrection is at hand." He says, all of Israel is following Absalom. David says to his servants who are with him in Jerusalem, "Let us go, let us flee. We'll not escape from Absalom. We cannot escape from him. He's got all of these soldiers, got all of these people following him, and he'll come and take us, and destruction will come upon us. He'll strike the city with the edge of the sword." And so the servants say, "Whatever you want." David went out with all of his household after him, 8 wives and 19 children, or almost 19 children, ready to do whatever my king commands. They went out, but the king left 10 women, concubines, to keep the house. So that's why we said we know we had at least 10 concubines. Might have had more than that. Here's a man that's got, 8 wives and 10 concubines that we know of. So he goes out, and when he gets outside the city, Absalom leads a tremendous insurrection against David. David's out in the wilderness again, like he had fled from King Saul right after he'd killed Goliath. Now as an old man, he's fleeing again. And so finally it becomes so great that the men turn against Absalom and turn to David. But let's talk about what Absalom does. Absalom comes into Jerusalem, and when he gets into Jerusalem, he takes these concubines and puts them up on the king's house, and on the roof of the house he openly has sex with all of these 10 concubines. I'm going to mock my daddy every way that I can. Long story short, Absalom is killed. He has beautiful hair. There's a description of Absalom that talks about how handsome he was and everything. But as he's fleeing from David, as the tide shifts back to David, we don't have time to look at all of this. We're trying to survey the book. His hair gets caught in a tree. Cut his hair once a year. And the Bible tells how many shekels that weighed, and there are 2 shekels. But if you take the big shekels, his hair weighed 20-something pounds. I've tried to imagine how much hair you'd have to have 20 pounds of hair. Anybody cut hair? Anybody beauticians? How much hair does it take to have 20 pounds? But you take the smaller shekels, and it's somewhere between 3 and 4 pounds. And that's very logical. But the times all the perfumes and oils and the Brillo cream, little Dalbaduya type thing, got all of that and put that in your hair, and so he'd cut his hair, and it could be 3 or 4 pounds. That beautiful hair. Guess who kills him? Joab, the chief of David's army. That is interesting. How's your life going? David's life is they bring him news that Absalom's army has been defeated. He said, well, what about Absalom? And in a very, very moving verse, twice he cries out, Absalom, Absalom, my son Absalom, would to God that I had died in your place. That's parental love. That's why you can't give up on them. They're always your child, you know. And so, but this is David's own family, his firstborn. What's he turn out? Well, turns out bad. And David returns to the throne, and that's the end of today's lesson. Okay, that's a good stopping place. Just as a matter of comfort, when you were raising your children, if I know your heart, I think I know the heart of all of you, you did the very best with what you did and what you knew of how to raise children. Now you look back and beat yourself up. Well, why didn't I just do this? Why didn't I do this? Oh, I wish when they were younger, you know, what parent is there, including this one, who has not ever had those own thoughts in relationship to his own children? But sometimes our children turn out wrong and we beat ourselves to nothing. I'm not worth anything. Now, if you were an absent father or an absent mother, you have some guilt to deal with. But if you were there for them and you were doing what you thought was best, is there a better way to do it? Yes, but you didn't know it. You loved that son or that daughter, so if you had known how to do it. So don't beat yourself up because your children are wayward. Here's a man after God's own heart. And I want us, before we finish this study, to read David's last psalm. The next to last chapter is old man David looking back at the totality of his life and saying, throughout every moment of my life, God's been with me. And so you were doing the best you can, and just keep on. And don't give up on your children. Don't you give up on them. How many wayward children have come to themselves and in later years come back? Sometimes even after the death of their parents. That's it for today. We'll see you next Sunday.